Merry meet sunflowers. Just some advice today, really, for new witches. And by new, I don't necessarily mean young, I just mean new to the path in any way. So, some people obviously come onto the path really late in life, and some people, like me, maybe jump around and realise that they are a witch when they are really, really young, and then go through a big, long, tangled route to get out at the other side of that and reclaim the word again for themselves. So, that's one route that could be taken, rather a labyrinthine tirade through a million other different descriptors before you realise that where you started was where you were most at home. And other witches, if they're lucky, will start on their path really young. I say lucky, there are a few pitfalls obviously for witches that do come to the path young, as in young in years. There are a lot of difficulties with regard to the kind of text you should be reading, what's age appropriate, what takes into consideration the fact that you're younger, the whole argument about Silver Raven Wolf and that kind of thing. So obviously there are pitfalls, but I think it's really fortunate to come onto the path so young, or to realise that you want to claim the word witch young, and it is something that I felt really fortunate for as well. I just wish I kind of stuck with it a bit more, but no regrets. So, my advice for young witches, firstly, a while ago on a forum, I'm on a couple of pagan forums. I don't actually post on them a lot, but I'm on UK Pagan and I'm also on the Cauldron. And there are a couple of other places like Wiccan Together and stuff that I look around, mostly for stuff that I might want to explore more, or just to see what other people are saying so I can kind of go from there. But I was looking around on a forum a while ago and I saw a discussion happening about, the issues that older witches or more experienced witches have with newbies asking them questions that are impossible to answer, that kind of thing. I do think it's very important not ever to give people that are new to the path the cold shoulder. And if you're being given the cold shoulder, then that's not your fault. If you're asking in all genuine interest and you have a pure intention with it, then nobody should be treating you meanly for doing that. However, there are a few bits of advice that I would give. Asking how do you become Wiccan or how do you become a witch is way too broad. Nobody is going to be able to answer that kind of question for you, no matter how practiced or experienced they are. Teach me everything won't work, because this is a path with a lot of depth, has a great many layers to it. It's a very multifaceted path, and it's also highly individualised. So there would be no good witch out there who could, in all good conscience, claim to have answered that question for you, because in reality, if they wanted to be a good guide and a good mentor for you, they would tell you that most of this stuff you just have to work out on your own. And you just do have to work it out on your own. That's just the reality of the situation, because there are so many little wormholes that different witches want to go down, other witches may wish to reject, you want to go off somewhere else, that kind of thing. That's why we call it a path. So you very much have to forge that path for yourself. So I would say be very specific with the questions that you may want to level at other people. And remember that you are walking your own path, you're not walking their path, so that's very important as well. It can be very tempting when you're right at the beginning with something and you're very unsure of your footing to kind of have a look at the steps that other witches have taken and just follow them outright, but that's not going to help you to get in touch with your own personal power and to be in touch with your core being and understand who you want to be as a witch and as a human being. So just ask specific questions so that they can keep it brief and descriptive and helpful to you. Asking broad questions like how do I do this, as in how do I actually embrace this path, it's probably not going to result in you getting decent specific answers that you can put into your practice. It probably will after a while just result in frustration, because the path has so much depth. There's just no way you could answer a question like that. And the enjoyable part of having a spiritual path is that you do get to craft it and define it on your own terms. So if you're not enjoying doing that at that stage, it's probably because you're still going through a lot of deep-seated insecurities or uncertainties, and that's totally fine. But somebody who's much more experienced and further along the way won't be able to answer that type of question for you. So they should just level with you and tell you that, really. The way that you start defining and crafting your own path is obviously through study, research, and comparing and contrasting your resources, which is the most important thing. I've said a few times on my channel so far since I've been here, and I've noticed so many other experienced witches and wise ones on YouTube as well, just saying that to have one resource is no good. You know, you need to branch out, you need to see what other people are saying, and have a look at the way different people define certain things within the circle and within the craft, because there are a lot of weird definition changes that have happened culturally. You know, linguistics kind of reform themselves and change themselves over time. So have a look at what you're actually reading, and see if what you're reading somewhere else is actually pertaining to something different. I think is quite important to note. Study and research should be really enjoyable, and you should make it something that's fun for you. It shouldn't be a chore. I think anybody who wants to reach the end of the path too soon is missing the point. And I also believe that you never really reach the end of the path in your lifetime. You know, if you are a dedicant and if you know that this is something that you are going to be doing until you leave your earthly vessel, then you know that the path is never over, and that's part of the enjoyment of it. You know, you do hope it goes beyond into the next thing. Labels. I've spoken about labels before. I would recommend for young witches that you do not label yourself too quickly, and this is something that I've seen a lot of problems with, and it might be very presumptuous for me even to make a video on this topic with regard to advice and such, but I think it's just kind of friendly and helpful and neighbourly in a way, and I really like looking at the advice that more experienced witches have given to people that are newer on the path. And this advice really is just quite generalised, but I do think it's really important not to search for a label too quickly. And a great many people on YouTube have made excellent videos about this. There is one that Rodriguez Mystic made that I will link below, because I think it is just so excellent and goes into so many of the various different reasons why somebody may be too quick to choose a label, or may have some anxiety about the fact that they do not yet have a label that they can pin onto themselves. Labels are a double-edged sword. In one way, I can appreciate why they are such a matter of interest, and why they have such gravitational pull, or such magnetic pull, because I think a lot of people who have very specific trains of thought about things like divinity or about magical practice will want to find the rest of their group. You know, they will want to converse with other people who feel a similar kind of thing, and have a similar standpoint, because it can be quite lonely working in isolation all the time and wondering if anybody else really feels the same way as you, wondering if there's any kind of further connection you can make, any empathy that you can enjoy. And so finding a label is very exciting when it comes to that, because finally you have a label that you can pin on yourself, which means that you can notice everybody else who's the same way, and you can have discussions about more specific or in-depth topics that before you may have need to explain to people so they could give you their opinion. For example, like me with pantheism, I've been a pantheist for many, many years. I only discovered the word pantheist a few years ago, and it's made things so much easier in terms of getting to the resources that I want to get to quickly, finding the books that I want to read quickly, and finding other places on the internet where I can converse with people who feel the same way, or searching the word pantheist and finding related videos and such. So labels do make things easier, they simplify things a great deal. The problem with labels is that they also induce a sense of belonging, and that belonging can often not come from a very deep place. It can actually be quite superficial if you pin the label onto you too soon, in this kind of desire to belong, and this desire to say, this is where I am, and now I can go on to, I can go beyond the 101 stuff, and I can advance into whatever. I understand why it's tempting to do that, particularly if you're quite sort of a precocious, progressive person. You pick things up quickly. You might feel kind of weird and at odds with yourself if you don't have a label yet, particularly when you've been on the path for a while and you've got that frustrating feeling of why don't I know who I am still at this stage. But when you're new and you first come onto the path, I think the label can be quite enticing. And I think it's very, very important to try and refrain, if you can, from publicly or boldly announcing that you are one thing or another, because it can be really difficult for yourself to backtrack if you later discover that there are other modes of thinking that you kind of favour or would like to explore. There's a lot of guilt when you bin a label. There's a lot of guilt when you step back from a label and wonder, is that really who I was? And there's also a lot of self-doubt if you attach yourself to a label very quickly before you've done all of the necessary research or the necessary exploration that you might need to do to know that you're 100% secure with a label. Then when it comes to having to shrug it off or second guess it, you may get feelings of incredible self-doubt, or you may be angry with yourself, or as I said, you might feel guilty. There are all of these awkward things that may happen as a result of you choosing a label too soon. And also, you know, variety is the spice of life. Give yourself a chance to branch out and enjoy learning and enjoy the process of finding out who you are. I think it's important to mention that it's not cool to be fickle about any kind of belief that you may wish to take for your own, but by the same token, it's not cool to be totally hardcore before you've had a chance to enjoy the value of the fact that you are at liberty to select the ways that you want to practice and the things that you want to engage in, the things that you may wish to read about further and the things that you're not so interested in. That's a very enjoyable part of finding yourself on a path like this, which is so multifaceted and which is so individualized, you know. So charge yourself with that energy to go forth with the inspiration that comes from liberty and the inspiration that comes from you just being you and finding your feet in your own time. I think that's really important, and I think a label can kind of put a stop to that, and it can also kind of put the blinkers on you and narrow down your exploration, which is a shame because exploration should be as free as possible. I would also say it's important not to join a group too quickly, and this is something that I don't have a great deal of direct experience of, I must admit. I have been to pagan moots and stuff like that, but I've never practiced my ritual with anybody else. However, I do feel that, particularly on Wiccan Together over the years, I've seen young witches eager to look for a group before they have really been on the path for long enough to know their own core being and to know their own mind. That sounds really patronising, but let me just explain, let me just kind of like expand on that. I feel that social dynamics and group dynamics can be very convoluted and complex. They are convoluted in the adult world, but they're even more so during adolescence. This is for those witches who are younger in age, you know, who have been lucky enough to own the word witch at a young age. In adolescence, you're changing all the time. You know, your core being is more fluid, it's more elusive. You can't always grasp hold of it as well as you can when you are in your late 20s, like I am. I think it can be very important not to place yourself in a very strict social dynamic or in any kind of social group that may have any kind of politics or high emotion attached to it, which I feel that groups based around spirituality often can do, from my indirect experience from reading and so on. And I think it's really important that you allow yourself some time to do your own thing. If you are looking at something like British traditional Wicca, I think exactly the same thing applies. I totally understand that there's a stringent hierarchy, there are certain steps you need to go through, and you can't go through these steps outside of the boundary of an accepted BTW coven. I get that, but again, I would say the same thing. You know, any coven worth its salt will not take you when they don't feel that you are old enough and experienced enough, sophisticated enough in your beliefs to handle the group dynamic, because there is that group dynamic there and it is difficult, it can be tangled, it can be very difficult to handle. So I would say it's important to kind of relent from that, and I know for some people who are very drawn towards working in a group context, it can feel like any working you do on your own as a solitary is not valid or not legitimate, but no one's asking you to do any magical working or even ritual working, simply asking you to take your time, hold steady, you know, don't rush straight into something that you may later regret, because spirituality is very important to every individual who follows a certain spiritual path. It's something that you don't want messed with and you want to be secure in. And when you're dealing also with the changes that are taking place inside you as a practitioner, but also as a human being, and then on top of that, the changes that take place in the group dynamic, trying to work things out, trying to work out where you stand, that kind of thing, that pack mentality that unfortunately, even though we feel in many ways we've elevated ourselves above the beast, there is often a pecking order, and there are obviously certain energies that run high and weird feelings between people, difficulties, politics, that kind of thing. I think that can only further convolute and complicate the process of trying to find yourself on a path that works for you. So that's why I would say leave it alone until such a time as you feel you're strong enough in your spirituality and your core being to know that if you do come up against any problems as a result of being in a group dynamic, you will be okay with that. You will know who you are and you will be able to comfort yourself through it. The broom closet is actually a good thing. It is a useful construct. The only time that it's not useful is when it becomes toxic, when you're hiding away in there when you really don't want to be hiding away in there. But in terms of discretion when you're new to the path, and in terms of just feeling out your way, working out who you can and cannot trust, working out who will be susceptible to the ideas you're putting forth and who will absolutely shut you down, I think the broom closet is a great little healthy comfort zone from which to dip your toes out and into the water of openness and sort of assertiveness in that aspect of your life. So don't reject and resent the broom closet too soon. I think that it is a very useful construct when used correctly. It's there for you to test the waters, it's there for you to work out how you feel about the process of coming out of that closet, who and who does not need to know, who and who does not deserve to know, this kind of thing. This is a very tangled thing to grapple with for any witch, particularly when they are young to the path. And I think that it's very important to spend some time in there actually enjoying the safety that it gives you and actually working out how it is that you would like to eventually emerge. Practicing, I think, for the eventual initiation for yourself into magical practice is important. So I do feel that, there's often this issue when you first come onto a path like this, which involves practicing magic for the vast majority of us. There is often this moment where you think to yourself, where is the point at which I'm ready? Where is the point at which I'm ready to cast a spell? Where is the point at which I'm powerful enough to cast a spell? Where is the point at which I know enough? And some people will advise for you to just jump straight in, just do it. There's no way that you're going to know whether or not magic is effective unless you're actually practicing it for real. And other people are more in that side of the area where they would argue that camp, there we go, they're more in the camp that would argue that it's important to take your time to study a lot, to go through the motions a lot and kind of walk your way around it a lot, but without actually doing it, without putting energy into it, because you must be very, very practiced for that. Whereas the first camp is like, well, how are they going to know that they're practiced in that unless they actually do it for real? So I think there is that kind of minefield, and a lot of people are stuck somewhere between. And certainly when I was younger and I first started practicing magic, I didn't have that because it came really organically to me. Whereas now coming back onto the path, I'm extremely uncertain. I really don't know. It's kind of a confusing thing for me. But I would say that practicing things like concentration, appreciation, and mindfulness will get you a very long way. If you practice these things outside of the magical construct and outside of the ritual space, then you will find that not only will they improve your chances of working effective magic when you do choose to do that, but they'll also improve your general life. They are skills that can be used in every aspect of your life. And if you gradually train yourself to be aware, to be mindful, to be appreciative, and to concentrate, the art of concentration is absolutely paramount in magical working and ritual working. But it's important that you don't just go into the ritual space straight away, demanding intense concentration of yourself, if in your life outside of the circle you actually have an attention span of like 5 minutes and you can't really focus on anything and you've never really been able to follow through with anything. And the same with appreciation and mindfulness and things like that. If you go into the ritual space and the ritual mindset expecting these great big grand cerebral skills from yourself, when in your outside life you are not mindful or appreciative or concentrated whatsoever, you have no focus, nothing like that, then how can you expect that suddenly, just because you've cast a circle and you're in the ritual mindset, that you're going to be able to do these things? You're going to frustrate yourself, you're going to fall down very quickly. Most of the skills that are required and necessary in good magical working are the skills that are required and necessary to have a fulfilled and satisfying life anyway. It really is as above, so below. It's a microcosm of the macrocosm, often, the magical mindset. It's just really a condensed and amplified version of the things that you will need to exude in your life to make it fulfilling and make it magical anyway. So practice these things all the time. Don't just expect them of yourself out of absolutely nowhere. Don't expect them out of thin air. If they don't come to you naturally outside of the circle, and if they don't come to you naturally, hone those skills, address those difficulties within yourself before you start to practice magic and resent yourself for not doing it right or for it not feeling as potent as it should do. I would say that it's important to spend time in solitude. This has nothing really to do with what I spoke about earlier in the video about joining a group necessarily, because I feel that even when you are part of a group, there's a lot of value to be placed on solitude in the spiritual journey. I feel like getting to know yourself and getting to know who you are and practicing having conversations with yourself and giving surface time to your inner voice is very important when you're embarking on a spiritual journey that you feel that you're going to take seriously and that's going to become a part of your life. So time in solitude is important. I think long walks are important, but please be safe when you're out walking alone. Don't put your headphones in and things like that if you are out in a really remote area or in the dark or anything like that. Be safe. That's something that's kind of always on my mind when I tell people to go for a long nature walk. Um, yeah, I think it's important to do that. I think it's important to practice meditation or even just sitting quietly, quietening your mind, getting rid of that monkey chatter that goes on in your mind. Things like that will really just strengthen your core being, and it doesn't need to be for a really long time. It can be really short periods of time whenever you can fit it in, whenever you can kind of pull over to the side of the road or take 5 minutes or just have a bath, whatever it is, and actually just check in with yourself and recognize that you are an incredibly potent and strong being and that you are really trying to hone something for yourself that is of great worth to you. I think it's very difficult to do that when you're constantly surrounded by talk and things like that. So I think solitude is an excellent thing to have and to develop and to work with if you are seriously embarking on any system which involves witchcraft or indeed ceremony or ritual, anything like that whatsoever. The last two things I want to say are one, keep a sense of humour when you are new to something and when you're really investing into something and pouring your whole heart into something. Humour is something that often seems to be missing when we talk about things like magic and high ceremony and certain specific spiritual pathways and shifts that are going on and things like that. It can all get very serious, and it's really nice to be able to just lighten up about what you're going through. Humour can really help you, particularly when you make mistakes or get things wrong. I don't think that humour should be a stranger in the circle either. That's something that I will say. I think that the power of laughter and the energy that it harnesses is a beautiful thing and should definitely not be exempt from circle work, ritual work, the ritual mindset, or anything else of that nature. I think it's something that makes us feel great, it makes us feel invigorated, it keeps us young, keeps us fresh, keeps us going. So it's something that definitely can do its work. And when you get frustrated with yourself, or when you maybe when you're like, for example, studying the runes and you think, how the hell am I ever going to remember all of this? Laugh, laugh at the ridiculousness of trying to learn this ancient linguistic system which has been turned into some kind of a magical language which has in turn become a way to divine the future. I mean, look at it from the perspective of somebody that is kind of standing back and thinking, this is bloody crazy, but I love it. I love it. I love that I'm frustrated. I love that I don't know where I'm going. I love that I'm surrounded by books and it's just completely taken over my thinking for this moment in time because I feel passionate. I want to move forward. Okay, it's crazy. I don't know where I'm going to start. Everything's up in the air, but I want it. I am hungry for it. I'm buzzing for it. That's where humour gives you something really seriously nourishing for yourself. And also, the important thing to remember as well is to be kind to yourself. Do not punish yourself, don't scold yourself. Don't look at other people's pathways and how sophisticated they are on their pathways or how certain they are and berate yourself because you're not there yet, because that's not going to help yourself. And that's where I think solitude is important too, because you can recognize yourself in that mode of self-punishment and in that mode of berating yourself for not going far enough or not being enough. And that's not going to help you. You need to pour nurturing and nourishment into yourself and strengthen your core being with the kind words that you say to yourself and the encouragement that you give to yourself. It's beautiful to have encouragement from external sources, but that internal encouragement is going to feed you so much more for so much longer. Blessed be.